Let's get started. My name is Martin, and I'm a librarian at LA County Library. Today we have three really great queer authors who are here to share their unique experiences with all of us. I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. So we have Leslie Anne Frye Thomas, and she uses she, her pronouns, and she is an Emmy Award-winning writer, wife, and foster mother turned adoptive mom with an unapologetic passion for Black queer stories. As a creative director and first-time author, Leslie Ann's career spans 2 decades. In that time, she's produced original content for video, stage, and print. Leslie Ann is energized by life's complexities and, as a queer artist of color, is committed to reflecting its intricacies in her work. The author solidifies this in Poom Poom Rock, There's No Place Like Homo, the story of a young Jamaican woman who, years after surviving a brutal conversion therapy attempt, returns home not just to face her demons, but to bury them. We also have Shing Yin Khor, who uses they, them pronouns and is a Malaysian American installation artist and cartoonist exploring the American myths and new human rituals. They are the author of The American Dream and the newly released as of 2 days ago, The Legend of Auntie Poe. And we also have Wendy Heard, who uses she, her pronouns. She is the author of two adult thrillers, The Kill Club and Hunting Annabelle, which Kirkus Reviews praises as a diabolically plotted creep show from a writer to watch. She's Too Pretty to Burn, which Kirkus called a wild and satisfying romp in a starred review, marks her YA debut. She is a member of Sisters in Crime, International Thriller Writers and Mystery Writers of America, and is a contributor at crimereads.com and Writer's Digest. Wendy lives in Los Angeles, California. All right, so I'm very excited to have all of you here. So let's start with Leslie Ann. When did you start writing your book, and how long did it take you, and what inspired you to tell this story?
Well, I started writing Poom Poom Rock about 5 or 6 years ago, and basically I started writing the story, or the story started because I was from Los Angeles and I lived in West Hollywood, and I was about the party life. So the story started as that. I'm now living in Miami, so as I moved, the story kind of changed and it got a real kind of Caribbean vibe to it. And what I realized in living in progressive, Los Angeles is a lot different than living in, Miami, which is a party place, but it's also very conservative. So I wrote this story because, as I lived here, I just began to kind of really understand this conservative culture, which is actually very homophobic. So that's why I'm writing this story. I'm writing this story because I'm living it.
Okay. Do you feel like so Nate's story kind of parallels your own?
In many ways, it does. Nate is Jamaican and I am African American. But I just living in Florida for the past 10 years. My wife is from the Caribbean. I know very few people who are American, and I live in Miami. So it does parallel my life in many ways, but I've just embellished it.
Very cool. So let's kind of do the same question for Wendy. How did you get into writing thrillers? Were you inspired by something or someone? And did you know that this is what you always wanted to do?
No, I thought I wanted to write like literary fiction originally when I was, first started writing out of high school. But then, it was one of those things where like you think you're this type of artist, but then when you write, a different thing comes out, and so I tried to write a literary book and it would come out as like a mystery thriller. And I guess I just always really liked that type of vibe, I guess. It's just sort of like the kind of thing that comes out when I sit down to write something that I think is going to be like serious and meaningful, comes out as like a romp. I'm like, okay. Uh, so yeah, I don't know. We don't know why we make what we make sometimes. It just comes out that way.
It comes out.
Did you, is that how you think about what you write, like as a romp? Is that like,
Well, when I was writing The Kill Club, which was my adult thriller before this young adult one, I found that one was like a total like, excavation of a lot of things. And I took that book really seriously and it meant a lot. And it was definitely received as like a fun roller coaster ride. And I was like, all right, cool. I'm glad that something could be entertaining and meaningful at the same time. But yes, I do hear comments like that always make me kind of laugh. I'm like, really? Like 25 people died in that book. All right, that's cool. Like,
I think it's funny that you describe it that way, because I picked it up because I thought it was going to be like super cheesy, but it was way more serious and like way just like not what I expected at all. So it's funny that you described it that way. I really enjoyed it for that reason, I think. Um, Shing, you do so much. I just looking at the amount of stuff you do, and like a diverse amount of stuff is so cool. You're sort of a jack of all trades and master of everything, essentially. How do you come into new projects? And what is your favorite project you've done, or what is the project you're most proud of?
I have a very short attention span, so I've generally found the best way for me to work. Like, I have a lot of ideas and I have a short attention span. So the best way for me to work is to work on multiple projects at the same time, just to keep myself interested in them. And as long as you kind of work on projects a little bit all the time, you do eventually finish them. Right now, I'm still experiencing that thrill of your favorite project being the one that just came out. So I've got Legend of Auntie Poe here. It's also a project it's the longest project I've worked on. It's 280 pages of drawings. And I've just never made a book this chunky. And I know this feels like so weird to say, but like I made a chunky book. And I'm really proud of that. It's
Yay.
chunky.
Yay.
It's like a workbook. That's so exciting to me.
Me too. It's an accomplishment.
Kind of in that same vein, what was different writing a chunky book versus like you're in a lot of anthologies and you have a webcomic and you kind of do a lot of shorter stuff too. So how is that different than what you've done in the past?
God, I love shorter work. I'm really good at hyper-focusing on something for a brief period of time. So I can get like a 10-page comic done in, a day or two, and that feels fantastic. But working in traditional publishing, like working with an editor and going through the whole publication journey, and that's months after months of like rounds of edits and copy edits and all that, it's a much slower process. Like I'm so used to working, even in anthology work, right? You have the idea, you write the script, you draw it, and you're done in a matter of months, even if there are edits. With this book, I came up with the story like over 3 years ago, and the entire process took about 2 years for me to completely write and draw. And I finished my pages about a year ago, and that is just, it's so hard for me to think of my projects on that kind of time scale. Although I'm obviously getting better at it. So in a sense, like while it is the project that I'm proudest of, it's also the project that was absolutely the hardest. Just because I'm not used to spending so much time on a project. I'm not used to waiting. I'm not used to finishing my work and having to wait a year for external validation. Because even with anthology work, you turn in your pages and it's usually out. Your work is pretty available for people to read within months. And I'm getting used to the world of traditional publishing and its speed.
Right. So let's go back to Leslie Anne. What does the process of self-publishing look like? Because that's probably very different than what traditional publishing looks like.
Well, self-publishing is basically a series of query letters followed by a series of rejections. So I spent about maybe 5 months really just hammering out query letters, finding publishing houses that seemed like they would be a right fit. And, I received some interest and, oh, it's not the right time and get back to us soon, or just, crickets, no response at all. So self-publishing is very much a gut check, and it really just checks that ego. So, I basically had a decision to make that I wanted, as Shing said, kind of get that external validation, or did I just want to kind of push through? So I decided, I wasn't getting any younger. So because I was unable to get an agent, I gave myself 5 or 6 months. When I wasn't able to land one, I just went ahead and did it myself. So basically, after writing and rewriting and getting, friends and beta readers to read it, I went and invested in a editor, and, just kind of hired her to kind of fine tooth it and really kind of help me hammer the story in. So that's self-publishing, figuring it out.
Your book also just came out in paperback. So what, I mean, this is just like absolute ignorance on my part, but like, what does that look like? How do you get a book from like a PDF to paperback?
So basically, I'm publishing through Amazon. So they do KDP, which is the Kindle publishing. So you just upload a PDF and they take it from there. You upload your PDF. The thing about Amazon is they take a nice big chunk of your earnings. So, they handle everything. It's pretty simple once you get your margins and things situated, but they do take a nice chunk of your earnings. So that's something that I learned via self-publishing. It's nice to, have that Amazon stamp and seal of approval. But if you want to be more interested in profits, then you're kind of better off just selling it yourself. So that's what I've learned.
So speaking of publishing, Wendy, what was it like trying to get your first book, Hunting Annabelle, published? As a queer person, did you face any barriers? And with the Kill Club, I've not read Hunting Annabelle, but I've read the Kill Club, and so was that a different experience because it was like explicitly about a queer person?
Yeah, it was a different experience. With Hunting Annabelle, the main character is a straight guy. So it was like, I wasn't really like, queer identity wasn't really a part of my online life at that point. I was just kind of querying, like you said, it was years of querying. I think hundreds of queries before Hunting Annabelle got published. I think there's like six books that didn't get published before that one did. And, it just wasn't really a part of my narrative. It just didn't occur to me to kind of have that be a part of it. I didn't really think that I could put that into my books or have that be a part of my books. It didn't even occur to me as like an option. But I had a queer editor for Hunting Annabelle, and so I thought to myself, I might be able to get a queer book through this editor. I don't know. Adult thriller is pretty old-fashioned. It's not a genre with a lot of queer representation. It's a pretty like old-fashioned. Everything you think about old-fashioned publishing is pretty true in like mystery thriller. And so I did get that concept through by her, but it was kind of a journey. Then I kind of had to be out online, and I hadn't done that before. And so that was sort of a whole, experience for me to go down that road, and the vulnerability of that, with like work and people that, I don't know. It was kind of emotionally kind of a lot in that book to process with the Kill Club.
Was there like fear of being pigeonholed as like being able to only write queer stories when you came out online?
I mean, I have only published queer books since then, and probably will only publish queer books from here on out. Probably in adult, I could publish another book that isn't queer if I wanted to, but in young adult, I think that's like my brand now. That's okay. That's fine.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with that. But yeah, I mean, I wasn't afraid of that. It was more like just discomfort, like felt a little intruded upon. Wasn't really used to talking about that. Wasn't, you're not used to talking about yourself as a writer. You sit alone in your room, and then you have to explain yourself later. So it's a little bit, it just felt a little bit uncomfortable.
So Shing, reading a bunch of your work, it's very clear that food is very important to you. Can you talk a little bit more about food and how the feelings and memories and traditions around it influence your creative projects? I mean, you even wrote an award-winning comic about food.
Yeah, I love food. I grew up in a family that, really, for them, it was really important to have dinner together every single day. And I think about food a lot. I mean, at minimum 3 times a day. I love food. I love eating. And it just felt very natural to me that food just kind of became a really recurring theme in what I in what I write, but it's also just a recurring theme in my life. All right. Like many of my friendships are formed around dinners out. Um, and I love cooking. I actually only really started cooking about 5 years ago, but I immediately started to love large cooking for large groups. Like that kind of became my thing. And I love hosting dinners. So because food is just such an important part of my life, like generally, it just makes total sense of like, of course it's in my writing. I've only recently started writing fiction, and it turns out that when you write fiction after like a good amount of time of writing nonfiction, your fiction still runs pretty close to life.
So, going back to Leslie Ann, what struggles did you face getting your work out into the world that were unique to you as a queer artist of color?
Well, I've already talked about just the query process and the series of rejection, so that was definitely a struggle. And my book is brand new, and this is I'm a first time author. It's my first little baby here. So I'm just figuring things out. And the struggle that I'm finding is surprisingly enough, the people that I think should be interested, which is, lesbians. A lot of times in reaching out to them, I'm not necessarily getting people to say, all right, let me go ahead and put you on our platform. So I'm finding that interesting because the story is, about these hot lesbians. So I'm finding that I haven't quite found a group of ladies here locally that are willing to take this project on. The ironic part is, I'm doing a lot with Miami Beach Pride, and I have a lot of, I guess, Caucasian gay people, men, who the story is not at all about, who are very interested in having me at events and spotlighting me. So it's just interesting. It's been interesting.
That is interesting. If you were gonna start the whole process over again, would you do anything different? And what would you do different?
I would probably cut Amazon out of the equation. You don't really need them. It's nice to have that seal of approval, but if I just kind of believe in myself, I don't really need them. It's a nice convenience to have them do all the shipping and et cetera, but it's not necessary. Jeff
Mhm.
Bezos will do fine without me. So that's something that I might have told my younger self. Just go forth and fly, young birdie. You can do it by yourself. It's very DIY. So
Yeah,
yes.
that's good to hear. That he can still go to space. Um, so let's go back to Wendy. So the Kill Club and She's Too Pretty to Burn both feature characters who have abusive and harmful relationships with their mothers, and they find support elsewhere, which is like not an uncommon experience among queer people, unfortunately. Where do you find support when writing difficult queer experiences, and where do you find inspiration?
Just a cheerful topic for my cheerful books, light and Leslie Ann, can I just tell you though that that thing you were saying about like, oh, my audience is this, but then you get contacted by other people.
Yeah.
Can I tell you how many like straight guys hit me up after Kill Club telling me, oh, this book is like totally speaks to me. This like it's like only straight guys that ever
So this
reached
is a
out to me
thing,
about the
Wendy,
Kill
is what you're telling me. This is a thing.
Club. And I was like, I am so
Okay.
happy that you liked it, but I'm so confused.
But I'm confused. I'm confused. So this is a thing.
So confused. Oh, so yeah, the terrible mothers. Yeah, the next book I have coming out also has terrible mothers, so it's I guess a theme. It is a thing, it's like you said, found family exists for a reason for a lot of queer people. There's a reason that we take so much comfort in each other in our warm found family dinners and holidays and all the things that the world we build for ourselves. So, I take comfort in my own as much as the next person. And as far as support, I actually have a really good relationship with my mom, which you wouldn't think from reading my book. We've worked at it though, it's taken a long time, but I have to say she's read all of my books and has never asked me a single question about this, which I don't know if she's just holding them or if she's gonna like, you know, she's gonna pop up with some question later, like, why did you do this? But maybe she'll like on like book 7, she'll be like, why? But I don't know.
That is odd that she's not with you.
It is.
So Leslie, and you talk about moms as well in your book.
I've got a mean mom too in the story.
Yeah,
yes.
you got a mean mom. So without spoiling too much, what guided you in having Nate's relationship with her parents, both of them actually, flesh out the way it did, specifically focusing on the mother, if you want.
So without having a spoiler, basically Nate is my lead character and she has a very troubled relationship with her mother, and I chose to relay their relationship as troubled because it's the reality for many of us in these Caribbean families. For example, you guys know the history of gay marriage. It was state by state by state. So my wife and I have been married 3 times to each other. We got married, right? I know. We got married in New York.
Romantic though.
We got married in New York at the DMV or whatever, the city hall for like $30. And then we did it a couple weeks later with friends. And then Florida finally caught up. So we did it in a big group wedding. So out of those 3 weddings, my mother-in-law didn't show up to any of our weddings. So just seeing how that impacted my wife and the relationship, it just was not a good look. So my story doesn't end with like a fairy tale and a happy ending. And I just wanted to relay that because it's not always going to be a sweet, happy ending. The reality is we need to meet people where they're at, and it's not always going to be happy. So the story ends like this because that's the reality. The reality is it's illegal to be gay in Jamaica as of today, June 17th. So as someone that lives in Miami, we hop to islands all the time on vacation, but it's something that I need to think of as a queer person. Will I get arrested when I go to Jamaica, when I take this 2-hour flight? So it's something that we still have to think about. So I wanted to make sure I put that in the story. Jamaica is not just about, weed and women and fun in the sun. There's actually a lot of injustices that are happening there. It's called buggery laws, and here we call them sodomy laws. So I just wanted to kind of put some reality into the story.
It's very much appreciated. I think it's important to highlight the truth of places that people might glamorize,
Totally.
So let's go back to Shing. So The Legend of Auntie Po focuses on May's experience as a queer Chinese teen, and she has romantic feelings for her best friend, which is also something that a lot of young queer people experience. What do you hope young queer people take away from May's story?
So May is just, this is not that complicated. May is based on my experiences of like crushing on my female best friends when I was a kid. And of course these were all unrequited. And in the book, May is dealing with her feelings, but she doesn't actually get to a conclusion about them. And most of the book is actually not about her queerness. It's about her understanding of her role in the world, which of course includes her queerness. And that, her relationship with her best friend, it doesn't become anything at the end. There is no romantic relationship. It is unrequited. And that was an experience I had. And that's an experience that a lot of queer people have. She's 12. She doesn't have the words to describe what she's going through just yet. This book is also set in 1885. But I want her to be in an environment where she wasn't going through necessarily the trauma of that. Like, no one's judging her for wearing pants. No one's reading like her crush on her best friend as anything other than like an intense friendship. And I think the thing I want, queer kids to sort of get out of this book is that your lives are amazing and complex, and they are not they are not reduced to who you happen to fall in love with or your feelings about other people or how you or any one facet of your identity. Like you have so much going on and you're going to continue to have so much going on, and especially for marginalized kids, marginalized teenagers and young adults, it's like you're dealing with a lot. So recognize the complexity of your experience and tell your own stories, and they're all going to be different.
I really loved the way that May's queerness came through in that story. I appreciated it. May's also a Chinese immigrant working during a time when the United States was passing several overtly racist acts barring Chinese immigrants from entering and participating in life in the U.S., which only fueled violence against these communities. Unfortunately, as we've been seeing, especially lately, racism against Chinese immigrants has not gone away. What impact do you hope May's story will have? And what do you hope young Chinese readers and children of immigrant families take away from it?
So, The Legend of Auntie Po is specifically about, it's set about 2 years after the Chinese Exclusion Act. It is about basically a part of history that very few people have done very research on, which is of the Chinese labor class in logging camps. Most people, are familiar with kind of Chinese workers in the Transcontinental Railroad, but most of the history just sort of drops there. Like, there's not a lot about what happened after the Transcontinental Railroad. And the answer to that is, well, the workers just worked other places. They built more railroads, they worked in mines, they worked in logging camps. It's all very obvious the moment you think about it. But part of the reason why this history isn't taught in schools much is because it wasn't really recorded. We don't have a lot of like first-person accounts of this time. Most of the accounts are from merchants, businessmen, white people writing about Chinese people that worked for them. And this I think about a lot because when I think about how Chinese immigration was blocked in the late 1800s, a lot of Chinese people in America today think of their immigration as being a very new thing. They think of themselves as being recent immigrants. And that's something that I feel contributes a lot to the model minority myth, which is harmful to everyone, and is completely built on white supremacy. So what I hope is that this kind of creates a curiosity about, Chinese American history and how old it actually is. And that realization that our history has been repressed, repressed or untold or actively concealed. I think kind of understanding our history also puts us in a place where we can realize that for a lot of other marginalized groups, so many other marginalized people, it was the same thing. Like we have so little queer history because it wasn't kept, because queer people were actively persecuted. And I think knowing our history allows us to accept both credit for helping to build America, but also complicity for settling unceded indigenous land. But all these things are things that we can accept and understand and help to rectify going forward if we do know our history, and it helps us act in solidarity with other marginalized groups. And that's solidarity in history and solidarity backed with solidarity action.
So speaking a little bit more into that, I'm going to ask all of you this question. What does your research process look like? So let's start with Shing.
Okay. So my research process, a lot of my book, I have an obsession with Paul Bunyan. Just really fascinated by the myth of Americana, or at least what we think America is, and all the myths that are associated with that. And Paul Bunyan is just one of the, he's the American legend. He's the big lumberjack, and so I just really gotten into this research about logging camps, and Paul Bunyan, which started on a very surface level. But the more I dug, the more I realized how diverse and interesting logging camp culture really was. And so much of this is that in the Paul Bunyan myths is that he actually, these stories actually become more childish, and they become more clean, and they become a lot more white. And a lot of the early stories, even if like the portrayals are somewhat racist, they were absolutely racist. They do acknowledge the presence of Black lumberjacks. They acknowledge the presence of indigenous logging workers and Chinese and Japanese. But so many of the myths that we have now are, they acknowledge Swedish and German immigrants. So that process, was something that I was doing in the National Archives. I was reading tons of books about it. And eventually I read this book called Chinese in the Woods. It's by Su-Fan Chung. It's an academic book about Chinese logging workers in the Sierra Nevadas. And the moment I read this book, like my book just fell into place. Like it fell into place with all of these other pieces of information I already had. But America actually has a pretty well documented logging history. We have logging museums up and down the coast, the West Coast, and Minneapolis. Minnesota has a very rich logging history. So in short, my research process is lots of books, lots of images in the National Archives. I spent a lot of time in libraries. I've got a reader's card for the Library of Congress that I'm very proud of. But yeah, I read a lot of really crunchy academic books. Just weird to write a book that's really just full of pictures.
I think it shows.
Thanks.
So, Wendy, when I was reading reviews for your books, a lot of people talk about how great you are at, like, how your research really shows through, and how they feel like you did, like, a lot of work around, like, reading about mental illness and policing and different things like that before you wrote your books. Can you talk a little bit more about your research process too?
I like to interview people, but like what you said, Shing, I also like to just get into like the academic text and get really detailed, and like just, I don't know, to write the scene set somewhere, you really have to feel like you've absorbed everything about that place, what it smells like, what it sounds like, what it feels like, your feelings about being there. Like it takes a lot of research to write one simple scene. And She's Too Pretty to Burn, probably the most research I've ever done has been around those installation pieces and She's Too Pretty to Burn, where there's this artist, he's doing these big installations. And so I had to like plan them as though I were doing them. Like, could you erect a fishing net that spanned the length of, Coronado Bridge? You know what I mean? Like stuff like that. Like I had to do, like, if you were to install a net here, what kind of screws would you use? Because I have to show them screwing the screws in. Or like if you were to melt a large amount of stainless steel and pour it into a mold, like what kind of machine would it take? Like all that stuff, and then to describe it from from the outside of what that looks like to someone who doesn't know what it is. So it's like a combo of interviews. Like with the Kill Club, I had scenes set inside LAPD's police station. So I just interviewed a detective and was like, if you were taking a witness here, where would they sit? Is there a recording? Like, what does it look like? So sometimes interviews are easier than reading up if it's something like modern like that. Like, what does the inside of a place look like? Or how would you handle this if you were, like, I talked to the FBI at one point, how would you handle this type of kidnapping? It's like the research depends on what you're studying. In LA, we're pretty lucky because a lot of the like law enforcement branches, the FBI has this, LAPD has this, like a lot of different organizations have a media outlet, a media branch, because all the studios are always calling them for information. And so they actually usually have someone on staff whose job it is to answer these types of questions, which is nice. So like for Kill Club, it was like Child Protective Services. And then for Pretty to Burn, it was more like research on how to do these art installations and stuff. I have an art degree, so I could like get partway there, but it was like the rest of it, I had to do a bunch of research. And Shing does installations, so they understand.
I do.
It is a crap ton of work figuring out how to do everything.
To be fair, I actually don't know if you can string fishing line across the Coronado.
You can. I know that now.
All right, so Leslie Anne, you dive into some really intense topics in your book, from wrote down a list of some specifics, even though I read this book. So like you talk about like addiction and sex work and self-harm and like a ton of really intense topics. What kind of research did you do to accurately portray those things?
Just good old Google. Good old Google. Just what I would do is go to my local library, and I've got my favorite little cubby, and I would post up there and just spend hours just just Googling and researching. And in my story is the lead character kind of narrowly avoids corrective rape. So a lot of people just don't know what that is. So this is corrective rape is something that happens pretty much throughout the Caribbean and throughout Africa. And it is as grotesque as it sounds. It's when you rape someone to correct their, sexual preference. So this was really hard to kind of get into and just kind of understand the history of that. So just heavy research, and in terms of like dialect, I've got a good girlfriend that is Jamaican that kind of walked me through all of it, and just kind of walked me through the culture. And a lot of the culture is about music, and you find that homophobia is so ingrained into a lot of dance hall music. So growing up and listening, I would just kind of dance and listen, and not really care about it. But as I got older, I would actually listen to these songs that are bashing gay people. So it was a lot of just immersing myself in the culture. My wife and I took a trip to Jamaica, which was awesome, but it was also research and seeing these places up close and personal. The name of the book is Poom Poom Rock. So we took a trip to Poom Poom Rock, which looks like a vagina. You can Google it, you can see it. It's amazing. It's amazing. It looks like a vagina. So we rolled up our sleeves and just kind of did the work.
That's cool. I appreciate everyone's love of libraries today. So let's go. Wendy, how did you decide you wanted to do a sapphic remake of Dorian Gray specifically?
I want you to know that I Googled Poom Poom Rock and it does look like a vagina.
Well,
Can confirm.
I'm not making this stuff up. I'm not making this stuff up.
I'm like, you cannot dare me like that in the middle of an event and expect me to not Google it.
Yes, it does look familiar.
Oh,
Here's Shing.
yeah.
Shing, right?
I feel like I do have to show everyone just kind of.
Yes, right? It looks super familiar.
Yeah. Seen this before. Sorry, I'm a children's author.
We are serious writers. We are intellectuals. So why Dorian Gray and why girls? So Dorian Gray is a really interesting, like, Oscar Wilde, like, this is queer history in action. At the same time, he's like such a jerk about women. He says so many things in that book, like women are mostly decorative. They don't have anything interesting to say and stuff like that. So part of me was fueled by spite, if I'm going to be honest, because he's not around anymore to be mad. I like picture him being angry though. That makes me happy. Yeah, there's a lot of crappy things in that book about women, men talking amongst themselves, and women are concerned with things, silly things, about social and domestic things and so many things like that. I also just thought it would be really interesting to explore those themes of vanity and the attention that comes when you're a teenage girl or girl presenting girl to the world. The sudden sort of onslaught of creepy sexual attention that happens when you hit just like a certain age in your development, when all of a sudden it's like, what is happening? There's like a spotlight on you. And so I kind of thought that, teenage girls were in a way like a more interesting way to explore the themes in Dorian Gray than grown men, because it's like more interesting. It's much more complicated being a muse when it's not, Dorian is kind of a one-dimensional character. He's vain, he's a jerk, but like, what if you didn't really want that attention? What if it was unwelcome? And what if it was sudden and you weren't looking for it and you were already struggling with issues you know, with your gender and with your, you know, sexuality and with your family, and you were sort of embroiled in this like deep internal struggle, and then all of a sudden it's like bam, spotlight, you are beautiful and the world needs to see you naked, you know, and sort of like horrible reality of being a muse and what it means to be like the subject, the object, and not have the autonomy. And so I thought it would be really interesting to explore that to like a very complicated slash maybe unlikable, unsympathetic teenage girl going through like a whole thing with it.
What was different from writing YA compared to writing adult?
I'm very like careful with YA. I really want to make sure that I'm like, these are teenage girls reading this. You know, this is for ages 14 through 18. And it means a lot to me that I'm saying the kind of things I want to say to a teenage girl, to someone coming, you know, to a child turning into an adult, you know, that in that sort of delicate phase in between. And so it's like, I definitely wanted to go dark because I remember being a teenager and I liked dark. And I was like, give it to me, like really dark and like gritty. But at the same time, in a way that wasn't like, rapey or creepy, or that would suddenly strike a chord of making you feel uncomfortable. So I really wanted to strike the right note there. Whereas with adult, I feel a little bit like most of the people reading adult thrillers are adults in their 40s and 50s, and I feel like I can play a little bit rougher with them and be a little bit less maybe emotionally careful. Yeah.
So I'm going to make a quick announcement that if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and make sure you address them to all panelists. I don't see any questions yet, so I'm going to keep asking my questions. If someone chimes in with a question, then we can address that. Also, if someone sends a question only to you, that might happen. Shing, May finds comfort in escapism and storytelling. Your stories often tackle emotional and personal issues. Do you relate to May in that storytelling allows you some sort of release for your feelings? And what do you enjoy in creating art?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm not stretching that much to write May. Like she is sort of exactly the kid that I thought I was going to be growing up. Or like, you know, in your head, you know, right? You've got like this idealistic version of you. And I kind of thought that, you know, maybe I could be a little bit more like Anne of Green Gables. Or or Laura Ingalls Wilder in Little House of the Prairie, like this kind of very creative, imaginative, sort of prairie type thing. And I love stories like that. I love stories of kind of brave, imaginative storytellers. And the big thing is that when I was a kid, all the books that I had access to, it's like of the kind that I wanted to read. It's like all these girls were white, and so much of writing May is indulgent. I wrote an incredibly indulgent character. Like she is the character that I wanted to read when I was 14 because she was the character that I wanted to be. You know, it's kind of this creative kid that tells stories that, you know, is going through a hard time but is still trying her best. And I just really, you know, I do really connect with May. And this is, you know, like I said earlier, this is one of my first few times writing a long fiction work. And I do feel like, you know, when you write nonfiction so often, when you write memoir, you really go for the emotions. Um, and I feel like that really carried through in my fiction work as well. I may have forgotten the very last bit of your question.
What are the things you enjoy when creating art? Like, what are your favorite parts of the process?
Oh God, I like physically making things. Like I like having ideas and now being old enough and skilled enough to execute them. That feels really good. I like finishing projects. I like making things that I want to exist in the world. And it's harder when you're learning how to make art, but you know, I'm pushing 40. It feels great to like have the skills to be able to make art. Um, and yeah, I just really like making it. Sorry if that's kind of like, what do you like about art? I just like art.
No, that's great. That's great. That's a great answer. So for Leslie Ann, how much of Nate's life is, you kind of answered this already, how much of Nate's life is a reflection of your own? Do you see yourself in any of the other characters, or are they a reflection of like people around you? How did you come up with these other people in your book?
I think Nate is definitely way cooler than I am. So, but yeah, she started off as me, but she just kind of evolved. She's an artist, she's shy, she's in a love triangle, and she's at odds with her mother. So I would say I do identify with the Nate character, but I'm just not as cool. It's not nearly as cool as her.
What about the other people in your book?
The other star of the book would be her mother, and her mother is really um a mean mom. She's a mean mom, but by the end of the story, you know where she's coming from. So basically, she's from the other side of the tracks. She's made it to this high place of prestige. She's in a politically entrenched family. So the fact that it's illegal to be gay in Jamaica is just really, kind of a buzzkill. You can't have this gay daughter and still be trying to climb this ladder. So while I don't identify with this mom, I just really wanted to make her, um, just kind of mean. But I also wanted to see, why is she so mean? So she's this mean because she's from, Trenchtown. She's from the ghetto. She's from the hood, and she doesn't want to go back. And she also, because she's Jamaican, she understands the culture. This is a culture that embraces homophobia. This is a culture that makes songs about killing gay people. This is a culture where you are criminalized just for existing. So while I don't identify with her, I did want to kind of get into her head and see, why is she this mean mom?
What about like the aunt character? So did you have someone like that in your life?
So the aunt is kind of the mom that everybody wants to have, the mom that's the accepting mom. So for me, I just wanted to kind of make someone that was the opposite, just someone that's the opposite. So she's the opposite character, which creates this jealousy because Nate would rather spend time with her aunt than with her own mother. So I just wanted to really stir the pot and create some drama there.
I appreciated her having that aunt around. Um, so let's see what else we've got.
Wendy, I'm very impressed at your color guard pen moves.
Yes, this is me fidgeting. I'm sorry. I try to keep it off camera, but I cannot sit still.
I'm super impressed. I'm
I'm
a fumbler.
I cannot sit still.
Okay, so it looks like there's a couple of questions in the chat. Someone has a question for Shing. He said, you have a spectrum of mediums you work with. How does your creative process differ beginning to end when approaching comics versus in real life installations? Or do you find the processes to be very similar?
The processes actually feel very similar to me. To be perfectly honest, my creative process is extremely messy, but it is also extremely linear. I truly do not have a particularly special creative process for any of my projects. It's literally, you start at the beginning and then eventually it does finish. But I actually, a thing that I enjoy about, let's say, building installation art is that it is a very large collaborative process that involves a lot of people. And since starting to write longer books, I feel like I'm finally kind of having more of that community again, like that kind of collaborative community. Like, I have editors, I have an art director, I have my agent. And in the last couple of years, writing and illustrating and all this work has actually felt a lot more collaborative to me, which has felt really good. Because for a long time, being a cartoonist felt like a very individualistic kind of solo craft, which turns out is not really something I super enjoy.
Right. So we have another one from the chat. Do any of you consider the queer movement the direction human evolution is moving in? And do you plan to write anything maybe socio-scientific about this?
I don't plan to write anything socio-scientific about anything at all.
Is this about our gay agenda to turn everybody else gay? They've
Mhm.
discovered us.
It looks like that's all from the chat right now. This is also something that I'm excited to hear about. It is Wendy. It's clear in both the Coco and She's Too Pretty to Burn that you have a strong connection to Southern California. Can you speak more on the importance of place in your work?
Ooh.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like an LA native, from here, and like, I don't know. Yeah, I like the whole beach murder vibe thing, where it's like beachy and it's pretty, but then there's like murder and darkness. So I don't know. I'm from like a lower income part of Los Angeles, and I definitely like to write about parts of these sort of like scenic places that you don't usually see on TV. I kind of have a passion for that. So like if it's going to be LA, it's going to be a lower, income part of LA, or it's going to be something that like sort of weaves the different socioeconomics together in Los Angeles. If it's going to be San Diego, it's going to be like burning stuff down in San Diego. I like that. You see these places on TV, and it's nice to kind of pick them apart a little bit.
As someone who is not from LA, when I read The Kill Club, I was like, this feels like this person really loves LA.
Love hate.
I really dig the idea of beach murder because it just feels right, and especially with the ocean right there. I mean, the ocean's full of dead bodies, so it's like it feels like you're kind of, sharing space with lots of dead bodies at all times. It feels like
You're exactly right, especially Venice Beach.
So we have a question specifically for Leslie Anne. Is there going to be a sequel?
Yes, of course.
Oh.
Of course there's going to be a sequel. So the idea with Poom Poom Rock is for it to be adapted to screen. So that's the idea. So if you go on the social sites at Poom Poom Rock book, you will see there's a bunch of video clips and audio clips. And, we just basically wanted to show everyone, what this story could do. So it's one thing to read it, but we actually wanted to show people, the ability of this story. So hired a bunch of local actors and, pick the juiciest scenes, and we shot them here. So the goal is to definitely have a sequel, but even before that, it's to, adapt it to screen. So that's the goal. Thank you, Jilly.
Yeah. So we are in our last 5 minutes. I want you each to tell us more about what is coming down the pipeline from all of you, what you're excited about, where can people find you. At the end of this, we will be sending out a book list with everyone's information on it. And at the end, there's everyone's social media stuff, so they know where to find you and your websites. So everyone will have that information emailed straight to them. If they have registered with an email address they don't want things sent to, I think Jennifer said that she's going to share her email address in the chat so that people can let her know where they should send that. But other than that, what are y'all doing? Let's start with.
Did you say Leslie?
Yeah, you're in front of my screen, so you're first.
Well, happy Pride, everybody. The next things on my calendar is basically I'm going to be hosting a couple events for Miami Beach Pride. So I don't know if anyone's been to Miami Beach. It's crazy. So I've done Miami Beach Pride many, many times. Most of the events I can remember. So it's nice to actually be on the other end of it and actually being a host and sharing information. So I'm going to be part of a social justice movement evening, a night of social justice, where I'm going to be kind of hosting and moderating a queer panel and just kind of really going behind the party. So as I've said, I've torn up this Miami Beach Pride many times. So it's nice to actually, give back a little bit. So I've got a bunch of stuff coming down the pike with Pride.
And that'll all be on your like your
Everything's on my social.
Okay,
Yes.
cool. And then that'll go out in the email. So Shing, what are you working on?
I've got a virtual book launch party for Legend of Auntie Po. It's going to be with Skylight Books at 11 a.m. on Monday. And I'm super stoked about that. I'm going to be talking about axes. They're letting me get super nerdy, so I'm going to talk about Paul Bunyan history. I'm going to show you all my axes and my saws and silly things like that. And yeah, my book just came out 2 days ago, The Legend of Auntie Po, with Penguin Random House. So it'd be wonderful if you'd buy it. And yeah, I can be found on social media at Sawdust Bear, on Twitter and Instagram, and my website is shingkhor.com. First name, last name.com.
And Wendy?
I am just turning in my final edits on my next book, which comes out just a little less than a year from now. It's called Dead End Girls, and it's about teenage girls faking their own deaths and going on the run. Yeah, so I can be found online at Wendy Heard on the socials and wendyheard.com.
Well, all of that will go out on the book list. Anyone have any parting words of wisdom, advice for inspiring writers?
My one piece of advice would be to just do it yourself. Do it yourself. It's great to have an agent, and that's my goal one day. I'm trying to be like you, Shing. But if you don't have one, it's okay to DIY and do it yourself, because the worst thing would be just wondering, I would have, could have, should have. There's no sense in that. So you might as well just go and do it yourself. Stop waiting for an agent or for someone to validate you. Do it yourself.
I actually absolutely agree with Leslie Anne on that, because the only reason why I have an agent and am working with traditional publisher is because I did it myself. And that was how I got noticed, not via query letters. It was my prior work that I
Nice.
published
Perseverance.
myself. Yep.
That's awesome.
So if that's all, then
Happy Pride, everyone.
yes, happy
Pride.
We do have one more Pride event coming up. We're doing a partnership with Pride Poets. You can call them and they'll write you a poem. It's pretty cool. Jennifer is sharing links in the chat. You can check it out, register for it, come hang out with some poets. And thank you everyone for joining us today. And thank you to these really great authors for sharing their stories and continuing to put out great things into the world.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye,
Thank you
y'all.
for having us.
Thank you,
You're the
Martin.
best,
Thank you,
Martin.
Jennifer.